Yes. Yes. Good day, podcast community. PeteKane here, community builder and podcaster. And I got a special guest on the show this morning. Start the week out. You can't get any better than this. So, JJ, tell our viewers who you are, what you do, and who you serve. And then we'll get into our podcast.
Hey everyone, my name is JJ Stewart. I am a pre-licensed counselor at the Lagos Counseling Initiative in Woodstock, Georgia. And as a new counselor, I'm currently pursuing my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And so I've just started this intern period under Jonathan Smith, who was just on this podcast a few weeks ago at Lagos. And me being in this position, I have a great opportunity to provide counseling services to individuals in person in Woodstock and virtually located anywhere in Georgia at a very low rate. So it provides access to people who may not be able to pay for counseling in many other situations.
I love that. I was sharing before we went on the air. I had, I don't think you can go. I know you can't go through life with not running into, challenges, depression, anxiety, or you name it. This thing up here, it can be good and it can be messy. And the three, at least, therapy sessions that I had, and I was dyslexic and ADHD, so I sought out those insurance-based options, and they were the worst, versus I had two in the last couple of years, and they were totally me out of pocket paying, and they were the best. And so I it wasn't until Jonathan shared that was the philosophy. What do you think? Life is messy at times. We have so much to go through. What drove you to lean into therapy and supporting and helping people?
Yeah, I can get into more of my personal story a little bit, but I went through some things in my own life, and I think there was a time, it was really when I was in college and undergrad, that I was facing my own, depression and loneliness pretty bad. And I kind of, I went to friends and I was like, hey, like this is going on in my life. And they were like, oh man, like you should go see a counselor. And I took that personally. I was like, you don't care about me. You're just trying to offload me on someone. Then I went and saw a counselor. I tried a couple out and I kind of just went for the cheapest option available. Like um I had a ministry that was offering free counseling. And then I went through, some of the online virtual counseling platforms, and it didn't really work for me. And so I was like, it's funny. I've seen myself a lot of my life as someone who is opposed to the idea of going to counseling. And then it was only after graduating, I was in my first professional career and still facing some problems. And I went to a friend, told him what was going on. And he was like, dude, you need to go to counseling. I was like, I tried that, not for me. He was like, no, you need a good counselor. You need the right therapist that's the right fit for you. I have this guy that I see. You should go see him. I started seeing that guy. I've seen him for 3 or 4 years now. And it was a life-changing experience. And I was like, a good therapist can change your life. And then, I was only a few years into my first professional career and already just hated going to work in the morning. I was so burnt out. And I had a boss at one of my jobs call me into his office and he said, are you passionate about the work we're doing here? And I said, no. Am I supposed to be? And he was like, yes, you should do what you love. You should pursue what you're passionate about. And I just had to think about it, because I think the first time I ever got asked that question, what are you passionate about, was when I was in college, and I didn't know how to answer it. And I went for, a long walk, and I came back, and the answer I came up with was, I am passionate about people.
Mm.
And so, during this later time when I revisited the question, it was like, how can I build a career around that? I went to my therapist that I had seen for a while. I was like, what if I were to be a counselor? And he was like, yes. um, but I don't know. It's been 2 or 3 years since I made this decision to change careers, and it's been
Mhm.
really just the best chapter of my life ever. So
Mhm.
I love this. I'm passionate about it, and I really love connecting with people. Like you've said, this podcast is a place where we're not talking about the weather. We're getting into the deep stuff. That's what I
Yeah.
want to make my life about.
What do you think? I love that, what you share with our community, and I think it seems to be more a guy thing than the girls. Is we like, hey, we can figure it out. We can plow through it. We're strong. We're men. What do you think? How do you think that affected your journey? Did you lean in? Was that a part of it, or were you more open to change and open to improving?
You know, I don't know. I think that I don't know if the whole, male female stigma thing was like an active role in my decision, but there is the stigma of men not, wanting to talk about their problems and feeling the need to perform and to be tough.
Mhm.
Um, but I think part of it too is just that, a lot of men are looking for concrete answers. They're like, I have a problem. I don't care about talking about it. I just wanna know how to fix it.
Mm.
And, that's what I've seen in this counseling room on both sides, as the client and as the clinician working with men. It's
Mhm.
like, I get people and I was like this, I'm just like, "I'm broken, fix me," you know? And I get it. I so get it.
Mhm.
But so counseling is hard, and a lot of people wash out of it because they're just like, it's a process. And I hate when other people tell me trust the process, but it is, counseling, it's a work in process. And I, as the therapist, I can't do the work for you. It's really, we talk through things, we get to the bottom of what's causing some problems, but then
Mhm.
you have to put in the work to change. um I saw this guy, Montel Jordan, the guy who sang the song "This Is How We Do It." He's a public speaker now, um,
Mhm.
and I got to see him speak a few months ago, and it's stuck in my head ever since he said this. He said,
Mhm.
"We all want God's promise for our life, but
Mhm.
sometimes to get to God's promise, we have to go through God's process, and we don't like
Mm.
that. We wanna skip to the promise." So,
Yes.
that spoke to me because I'm like, I wanna get from point A to point B, and it's hard, and
Yes.
I think that's the issue with a lot of men is they come in, they're like, I don't care about, or at least they think, the way they think. This may not
Yeah.
be true on a deeper level. It's like, I don't care about, being seen and heard and supported. I just want an answer. And
Mhm.
they do benefit from being seen and heard and supported, but they may not be aware of that.
That is so true. I had a podcast guest share this about like the first 7 years of our life, a lot of behavior is kind of programmed into us through whatever we're going through. Have you ever heard that? And do you think it had an impact on your journey? If it
Ab
did?
Absolutely. I mean, so much of our, um so much of our schooling, I've been in this master's program for a few years. I've always been so fascinated by people and psychology. So I had like an idea of this before I got into the field, but the amount of learning I've done is I've learned so many amazing things about people and how we operate. But I really think, yes, like our formative years are so dictating to the rest of our lives. Like you look at, if you read Freud and all of his theories, or you
Mhm.
look at attachment theory and temperaments, and there's just so many ways that are just so many things that happen in our childhood that affect us into our adulthood that may even be buried deep down there and
Mhm.
only rear their heads much later. But I think that um, there's one of the most classical that we all learned, hopefully, in grade school psychology is the whole nature versus nurture debate.
Mhm.
And I think most psychologists and therapists would tell you the answer is yes, both. But that nurture part starts from the day we're born. Attachment theory says that
Yes.
so much of our personality and how we interact with the world is determined in our first like 2 years of life, even before we're
Mm.
even really conscious, cognizant beings who are processing things. So many things are implanted in us.
Yeah, I noticed that, in my own journey, as because I grew up in a big family, is that, different the birth order and how they interact engage with each other. So many dynamics to it. We don't often do that self-awareness. We just react. And the
Yes.
reason I wanted to ask you this is you hear the word social media and you think, oh, social media, but it's
Hmm.
really just media. And there's so much out there. I gave up after my stroke. I gave up social media and my brain is so much more healthier. What do you think in seeing the world from your eyes? How do you think social media has affected us as a culture?
Yeah, I mean, look, from a young age, I got into social media, and I've always loved it as a means of staying connected and updated on people's lives that
Mhm.
may not see for a long time. I think that's great, but I think, people can fall into this trap of thinking that social media is real life because, and that's kind of this runs parallel with my message as a therapist is that everybody has stuff, everybody has problems, and
Mhm.
nobody talks about it. And so I think
Yes.
people fall victim to like, oh, everybody else is happy because they're posting like, oh, everybody's on these amazing trips and have all these amazing friends and relationships, and I'm alone in my suffering. And so
Mhm.
I'm still big on social media. I'm trying to grow there, but like trying to grow my brand and everything. But one thing that I say my number one value is authenticity. I want to be real. I one of my earlier experiences that kind of drove me to this field, I was a summer camp counselor at a Christian summer camp in college. And
Mhm.
that was at that time I was kind of a newer believer, at least like personally and intimately. And I had a camper, it was probably like a high school junior or senior, come up to me and say, JJ, you know what I like about you? You don't pretend that you have it all together. And
Wow.
I was like, thanks, I think. Because that kind of feels like a backhanded compliment. But I'm like, that is
Yeah.
me. That is my personality and my brand because, I grew up in a church, but I
Mhm.
always say, it's not that I ever said, I don't believe this stuff is fake. I hate it. But it was, I went to church and I was bored out of my mind as a kid. And it just felt like this pastor in his clean white robes was like preaching down at me in the audience. And it's
Mhm.
kind of, I think a lot of people end up walking away from their faith because of their struggles. They
Mhm.
see, oh, this pastor's so perfect, and he, I have so many problems that I'll never be like that. And so that has always, so when I really became a deep believer was in college when I was, depressed and struggling a lot. I went to a campus ministry where my pastor there was like nothing I
Mhm.
had ever seen. Like you know, he went up there, and during my first couple of messages hearing him, I think I heard him say a lot of things that I never thought I heard a pastor would see in a lot of different ways. But he also like cried his eyes out as he talked about he and his wife's multiple miscarriages, and a lot of trauma, like a lot violence and everything he'd suffered in his life. And I was like, wow, like that is just so different than the message that I got growing up. And
Mhm.
that's always been me. I was like, I want to show up as I truly am, in the good and
Mhm.
in the bad, and I want to get to that in others too. And coming on this podcast and talking about my brand, there's my professional and my personal, and I want to be the same in both.
Right.
And there are these boundaries as a counselor. I can't have a personal relationship with my clients, so it looks a little
Mhm.
different. But with my personal friends, which I have so many amazing friends, I'm always the guy that's, knocking down those boundaries. Like, I'll walk up to people and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And they'll say, "Oh, I'm good." I'm like, "No, how's it really going?" you know?
Yes. Yes. I had Jonathan knows him, but I'd always watched him and his wife, and they had this kind of joy when they would come in the door, and it was noticeable. And then when I
Mhm.
had him on my podcast, we were talking about, I think it was something to do with the consumption of media. And the average person in America watches like 4 hours of TV, and they scroll like 2.5 hours of TikTok type videos. And that's the consumption part. And he said, "Yeah, we don't even have a TV." And I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." He's the most creative guy that been around. He's writing books, he's doing this, and he's just leaning into his creative side of his journey. What do you think when it comes to consumption versus creating? How do you separate the two?
Hmm, that's a great question, Pete. I don't know. I mean, I know, as a younger person who grew up in the digital era, I can fall into that whole consumption as well. Um, I think, it really does take intentional effort because I mean, we all need to consume something, but there are a lot of really good and valuable things out there to
Yes.
consume as well. You've got books behind yourself. Like I had someone ask me this weekend, they're like, "Are you a reader?" And I was like, as a kid, I grew up, I read Harry Potter and the Hunger Games. And then
Mhm.
when I was in high school, English class beat it out of me. I stopped reading. I hated reading.
Mm.
Um, Never read through high school, never read in college, and then only in adult life, really spurred on by just a creation to figure out what's going on inside of me, alongside
Mhm.
counseling and faith and everything, and just, figure out life and growing and everything. I've started getting really back into reading nonfiction books. Um,
Mhm.
I saw a tweet once that said, if you they said everybody should write things public for reading. If you don't know what to write, you should read. And
Mm.
if you don't know what to read, you should talk to people. I'm probably misquoting that tweet. There was another step there, but I'm
Yeah.
just like,
No, I
I'm just,
understand what you're saying.
yeah.
I flunked English in high school. We were talking about you going to Georgia Tech. I went to Virginia Tech, and I made two unsuccessful attempts at Virginia Tech. And it was because I was the remedial reader. I didn't enjoy it. I was always misspelling every other word. So I had a lot of anxiety when I hit that email send button. It was like I was sending myself to the world. And every time I do that, there'd be misspelled words, it'd be grammar would be jacked up. And it wasn't until after my stroke I started to get over it a little bit, and I started to read more intentionally. Now I put in AI, like I'll take a book and I'll say, give me the 10 points of this book. Then I put it in the Notebook LM and it'll give me video, audio, and a slideshow. And then I read the book. And now I can comprehend and read at a fast pace. And I journaled every day, several times during the day. How do you express your creativity? Do you like to write it, or do you like to, sketch things, or what kind of feeds JJ's creativity?
I've always considered myself to be more of and I always get mixed up the difference between left brain and right brain. I've always considered myself to be more of a objective, formative person with a creative itch. Like I've always dabbled in music, drawing, writing, and I think where I'm able to put those, put the pen to the paper in the middle of the road is with people. So I really think, I see a future for myself, and this played a role in me getting into this field of counseling and writing, psychology, faith, and self-help, and hopefully speaking someday as well. So I'm, kind of, in this field as I try to promote myself. I will be starting to write like articles and blog posts, and and I always say, there are so many people who pursue careers in a creative slate, and I obviously admire people pursuing their passion, because that's that was a big change in my life when I did. But I think the way that I view it is the best way to get into a creative field is to do it out of your own expression and enjoyment, and not care if anybody else ever sees the work, because I think you'll make better work that way when it's coming from the heart than it does when you're just doing what you think other people want to see. And then maybe it'll hit if you're really writing, drawing, painting, singing from the heart. That's probably going to attract more of an audience anyways.
I totally agree. And I read for the second time John Maxwell's book, Thinking for a Change. And it was written in like 2002, 3. And, we are now in a very fast pace. You got AI, you got a lot of noise, you got a lot of social media, you got a lot of things to distract us. And, critical thinking always trumps AI. How are you using AI in your kind of journey? Is there kind of a discovery or a moment that you went, man, this can help me?
Yeah, it's funny, I think about when I was a kid, they said, oh, you have to learn how to do math because you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket. And now we have a calculator in our pocket every single day.
Yeah. I heard the same thing.
This is almost that for writing, which is crazy to think about. I am so thankful that ChatGPT was not a thing while I was going through high school and undergrad at Georgia Tech. And so it's so funny. I think ChatGPT released into public beta like the same month I graduated from Georgia Tech. So it's been weird now going back to grad school and my master's degree, and every single class starts with like 30 minutes of the professor saying, do not use AI for your papers. Do not use it for this and this. But, we have heard like, hey, this can be a valuable resource. And, AI is interesting. Well, this is an aside. For a long time, I didn't understand how ChatGPT works. And
Okay.
once I gained an understanding, it's magnificent. ChatGPT thinks one word at a time. Did you know that? ChatGPT,
No,
it
no.
it it just has studied millions and millions of pieces of writing online, and it just
Right.
you ask it a question and it writes one word, and then it says, "What is the statistical next word to think about?" And it says the next word, which is crazy to me. Like, how does it end up at a complete sentence? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
people have asked me like, "Oh, like as a therapist, are you worried about being replaced by AI?" Like, I know people who use an
No
AI as
way.
their therapist,
Yeah.
and there's there's multiple reasons why therapy is really helpful. One of those reasons is being able to, unpack and process your thoughts and your experiences.
Yes.
And I think ChatGPT can be helpful for that. But um
Mhm.
you also have to know what you're doing. You have to know the right prompts to ask it to get that. But the other thing that um that you get out of therapy that can never be replaced by a robot or an AI is being able to go into a room with another human being and tell them, your deepest, darkest secrets, everything you know that is wrong with you. And you're like, oh, if I ever told anyone this, they would throw me in the loony bin,
Mhm.
and them saying, no, like, that's okay. I understand. I'm sorry you've been through that. We're going to work through this is just such a shocking, in a good way, experience. Having that
Mhm.
unconditional positive regard of another human being. It
Yes.
reminds me, there's this guy in our field. He's a psychiatrist. He's one of the best public speakers I've ever heard in my entire life. His name is
Mhm.
Dr. Thompson. He's a Christian
Mhm.
psychiatrist based in Virginia. And he has this, I've seen him speak twice now, and both times he does this spiel on like and I don't know if this is a little too far out of the scope of this podcast, but he goes on this rant about, he was in an argument with a technology guy about the creation of sex robots. And
Mhm.
he's like, the guy who was arguing for them says, you know, I think sex robots will great because it'll give men who have problems in that space, an
Mhm.
outlet instead of taking it out on women or whoever else. And Dr. Thompson's counter answer to that is like they're never gonna make a sex robot that gets a migraine. He's like people what people want is somebody who has the
Yeah.
ability to say no to them saying
Yeah.
yes anyways. And I'm like,
Yes.
obviously, we went a little off the rails with the sex metaphor there, but it's the same thing with therapy. Having a
Yes.
human being who has the ability to say no to you and says
Yeah.
yes anyways is such a healing experience in and of
Yes.
itself. And an AI will never ever be able to do that because it's not
Yes.
human.
Totally agree.
And
Yeah. And I think, in the education arena right now, they're trying to figure out where does AI fit in a
mhm,
new world where it used to be the professor had all the knowledge and he was or she was giving you the transferring that knowledge to you. And now AI can do a lot of that transfer, but that emotional intelligence,
mhm.
that thinking that we're so gifted and unique for will never be part of that. What do you think emotional intelligence? How do you see it today? Do you see it getting a little worse, or is that an issue that's coming up in your travels?
Um, I think people have more awareness of the concept of emotional intelligence, which is awesome. Um, which I think, can be to a fault too. I think people can use like, "Oh, I'm emotionally intelligent" as an excuse to justify poor behavior.
Yeah.
I think true emotional intelligence is just, you know, an awareness of self-awareness of your own humility humility is a huge part of just acknowledging that you have been through stuff and other people have too, and giving people the grace and the mercy that you
Mhm.
wish people would give for you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I just it. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. My brain's going in 1,000
Yeah.
directions now.
No, that's that creativity to have that processing makes people so unique. But emotional intelligence, I heard a friend of mine, he actually goes to our church, and he asked this he was like the assistant dean of a school system. And he says, what are y'all doing to help students with emotional intelligence? And it was like, really, the guy just said, didn't have an answer. And it was
Mhm.
kind of like the first time I heard somebody ask that question. And we see it, we don't have to look very long. You can see the world where it is. There's people losing it over crazy little things. It's just like yelling and screaming. And it's like, do you think they're investing into that, getting a little bit emotionally stable? Maybe they need more therapy to help them with it. But what would you say to, now you've been on the other side of school, because when your college years started, you didn't have AI. How would you advise a new person coming up, just starting out? What would you, what you've learned today, what would advice would you give a younger person just starting out in their career?
Ooh, oh man. My first inclination is be like, hey, like, I hated getting out of bed in the morning in my first career. And it's even there were times that I really felt a spark in my first career, and most of those times were when I was helping people. Even in a
Mm,
technology space where I wasn't getting deep with people, I worked a lot in customer support and sales for a tech company, and it
mhm,
was a startup, so it was chaotic. We were running a million miles per hour, but I like being able to just have a conversation and be like, "Hey, how can I help you?" Um,
mhm,
but and so that's kind of the first thing is, I feel like I read the context clues of my life. Thought, these
mhm,
are the things that I feel like myself when I'm doing, and I followed those to their conclusions. So my second thing, I want to say, oh, quit your job and go do what you're passionate about, but I'm not saying that, because what I would say is take calculated risks, not willy
mhm,
nilly risks. I think because there's a while where I thought about getting into ministry, and I was just like, I was like, I'm not like a crowds person. I'm a one-on-one person. Plus I was just like
mhm,
thinking about the financial aspects, and like having a family in the future and everything. I was just like, counseling is you know so I believe this is so aligned with who I am, with the gifts that God has given me, and who I
mhm,
want to be, and who I believe God wants me to be. But
mhm,
it's taken a while for me to get to that, and I'm glad, this wasn't the first idea that I had, and I didn't just
mhm,
instantly go pursue it. It took a lot of, soul searching and understanding myself to come to this conclusion. So, I do, if that's my third piece of advice, like trust your gut, don't act instantly, but listen to your heart. Like it's such a delicate balance, because people can just I know people who've been out of college and they've been had 7 careers, and I'm just like, maybe they're doing the first thing, but it's like it is a calculated balance. um I don't know. And what I was going to say, going back to the emotional intelligence thing, there's a few
mhm,
quotes that I have written up on my bathroom mirror. um And the first one is the golden rule. You know, treat people the way that you want to be treated. And then
mhm,
another one is the quote by Maya Angelou that says, people don't remember what you say, people don't remember what you do, they remember how you make them feel.
Yes.
And
So
I love that. I say, I know those people. I know those
mhm.
people who just, I feel so comfortable and have had, you know, such an easy time connecting with, and I just really love and admire them. And I've said, like, I have always wanted to be one of those people. And
Mhm.
one thing I'll say about those people is, I think, the most emotionally intelligent people who are the people who have themselves struggled with, negative emotions, feeling unloved, unseen, invisible, less than,
Mhm.
insert your feeling, and have said, and they know what it feels like to be in that place, and
Yes.
know how, not even by learning, but instinctively, to make others not feel that way. I
Mhm.
so much older than my, but I was like, I've always wanted to be one of those people, and I feel like I've always held myself back from being that person because of fear of being judged. Like, I've always been the person who wants to, like, meet someone and ask them, like, "Hey, what's on your heart right now? Like, what's going on?" And I've never done that until recently, because I've been so afraid of, "Oh, this person's gonna think I'm weird. I'm gonna be cast out." It's so hard. Like, and I think, you know, I've struggled so much with anxiety in my own life, and just
Mhm.
worried about what everyone thinks about me. And I think this is the lesson that I'm still trying to learn, and I've somewhat internalized it, but not fully. People don't actually care. The people always say, like, think about the last time you saw somebody else, like, bomb in
Yes.
public, or do, or, totally overstep. Like, 99% of the time, it's like you don't remember, but you remember your worst mistakes. We all are our own
Yes.
worst mistakes. But take
Yes.
it. That was almost hard for me to accept at first, because I was like, oh, people don't care about me. That feels even worse than the thought that they do care too much about my actions, my minute decisions, and the
Yeah.
things that I say and do. But, you know, I think that, take advantage of that. It's like, you can ask the hard questions, tell
Yes.
people how you really feel, especially, okay, maybe don't go overboard on telling people how you feel about them if they're negative, but,
Yeah.
if tell people how you really feel about them if it's positive. Drop people random compliments. Like, it's such a
Yes.
great feeling. Yes. Yeah.
And it's funny you say that, because I don't know when it was, but I go to the gym and I listen to different things and I try to meditate in a way that I focus, try to sharpen the focus muscle and listen to intensely what I'm consuming. And a person said, I don't even remember who had said up, like, it's built in that we're kind of sensitive to what people think about us, but they have their own life. They don't give a rip about you. They're trying to live their life. And it was after I said that, I went, you know what? That is so true, because it's not that they don't care, but they have their own life. So they're
Mhm.
out there living it. So, but we are, as social beings, we do have a tendency to kind of, that feedback of acceptance is
Mhm.
real. And it's like, yes, it's real, but don't let it form so much of a habit that you're sensitive to even say anything, because you're afraid that that judgment and that rejection will
Yes.
be coming back to you, and so you hold it, you keep it inside you, and you
Yeah.
don't be your authentic self. I could geek out a lot longer, and I want to be respectful of your time. So, is there something that I didn't ask you that you would like to share with our community?
Oh gosh, there's a thousand things, and so there's nothing. Um, I'm really thankful for this time, Pete, for this platform. I hope, my hope is always just to connect with people and to make a positive
Mhm.
impact in their life. And so I hope there's someone out there today that's heard this, that's learned something. Um, but I don't know. I would just say, like, yeah, really just where this conversation has been leading, you know, don't get stuck in your head worried what others think about you. What you said, people aren't going to judge you like you think that they are. People have their own lives. And I think, all right, here's where I'm going. God did not design us to be alone. He saw Adam alone and he gave him Eve. We
Yes.
are social beings. We
Yes.
all have such a deep desire for companionship and community. And
Yes.
and it manifests in different ways in different people, but it's there
Yes.
in everybody, and it weighs on people differently. I've always considered myself to be a people person, first and
Mhm.
foremost. And I think learning that people don't just naturally care deeply, because not because they're bad people, but because they have their own lives and their own stuff and everything on their plate and their own families. I think that is something I really struggled with for a while. It was like, oh, like, that's hard because I just want to vibe. I want to be with people.
Yes.
And I think that has been my journey in adulthood, is learning how to, accept that as the world and go from that.
Yes.
I just really value human connection, and I
Mm.
seek opportunities for it at all costs. And the only thing stopping me from doing that 24/7 is my own fear and anxiety. Um,
Yes.
but I want to create relationships and spaces where
Hmm.
people are, safe and comfortable being who they are and expressing how they feel. And it's funny how much I try to create that in my personal life, and that's literally what I do for a job. And even though they have their differences, they run in parallel with one another. Um, I'll end on this. I've had a really amazing opportunity lately. I've been traveling the world and meeting with other young people from all over the planet. And in this community, people come from all sorts of different backgrounds, but we put vulnerability first. And it's amazing how you can meet someone from the other side of the planet, and if you're just being real with each other, you'll get to the bottom of it. Um, and find shared experiences and bond over those. And the other thing is, in this community, not everyone is a believer, but someone yesterday walked up to me and they said, "Hey, I looked up your social media and I saw that you've got a post about your baptism and your testimony." And I said, "Yeah, it's." I I put it this way. I said, I want to express my faith through my actions more so than through
Hmm.
my words. I was like, because I just think so many people out there, you know, I want to make people feel like they matter in my
Hmm.
personal and in my professional life. And, I hope that, I can do that by, following in my faith and manifesting the fruits of the Spirit.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And whenever I was going through difficult times, I drew back into isolation, and
Yeah.
isolation is the worst. Community matters, together we're better. And for those out there that need community, share this with people, because we all go through those times where we have to have that person, we call it the hero in the journey, that comes
Mhm.
alongside you to help you through it, because the future is bright, but sometimes those potholes get us really off track and in a place that we don't want to stay in that place. We want to keep moving forward. So I really appreciate you being here. Tell our viewers, I have one final question after this. Tell our viewers, how can they get a hold of JJ?
Yeah. So like I said, I'm new to this counseling space. I'm presenting myself. I talked a lot about my personal life and relationships today, but I'm presenting myself as a professional. I've actually just made a brand new Instagram account at Counseling with JJ, no caps or spaces or anything.
Okay.
My hope is to start creating content on there, kind of centered around these same things, around community, relationships, counseling, psychology, and faith. And then if people from the Woodstock community are listening to this, I'm available for counseling sessions. You can look up. It's at LC. You can email me at jj@lciwoodstock.com. You can look up our website, lciwoodstock.com, if you want to schedule a session with me. But even if you don't want to schedule a session, please email me. Please reach out to me on my social media. I'm happy to connect with you. Like I said, I put connection above everything in my life. So
we'll put it in the show notes. We'll put a link. And I always like, because what we were talking about, our journey and stuff. I together we're better. We have a school community. They can go to PeteKane.me/school. Your podcast will be in there. So if people want to get to know you, they can. And then we'll do our best to connect you up with the right person, because in that journey, you want to get support and help. And sometimes people have to have different levels that they need that support, because have that heart to serve, have that heart to help people. And that could be a great fit for somebody out there. But share this with people, because the worst thing we ever want people to be is a best kept secret. We don't want nobody to know JJ, nobody to know how he can support and help and provide you with those strategies, that mindset to move forward, keep moving forward, because the future is bright. But sometimes you get in a situation where you're at the bottom of the roller coaster. I was in my men's group this morning, and we were talking about the life of a journey. Sometimes you're at the top and things are good, but a lot of times you're down here when it's not so good. So what would be the one thing you would want our viewers to take home from our time on this podcast?
Gosh, it's hard to wrap all that up in a ball. The golden rule, they teach it to us in Sunday school. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. Don't let your own fear hold you back from that. And just pursue connection. It always makes life better. I have one more quote. I love quoting stuff.
Love it. Share it.
C.S. Lewis said, when you love others deeply, you're going to get hurt badly, and it's worth it every time.
I love that. That is a great quote. Thank you for sharing. And JJ Stewart, thank you for being a guest on the podcast and sharing with our community your journey, your story, and how you're making the world in Woodstock and the world outside of that better by being what you're doing and the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being a guest this morning.
Of course. Thank you.